Little do they know that they are heading towards the gas chamber. As the last prisoner manages to get in, Saul closes the door. These prisoners will not see the light of day again. While they are taking off their clothes and giving up all their belongings, an officer announces that they need skilled workers and assures them that they'd be paid. They do whatever it takes to keep their spirits high despite knowing that these prisoners are about to be brutally executed. They are then guided to go to a gas chamber. One prisoner starts to sob, anticipating that something horrible is about to happen to them. She's right, it wasn't long before she and the rest of the prisoners remain oblivious. As the gas chamber is closed, Saul and the other workers put their ears against the wall as the prisoners scream in agony. They all died a painful and morbid death. Later, the Sonderkommandos are aware that it's just a matter of time before it's their turn to suffer the same fate. They can't afford to be sitting ducks and they need to plan something out. Moments later, Saul joins the others in clearing and disinfecting the chamber while bodies are piled up prepared to be cremated. Out of nowhere, he notices a commotion and finds out that a young boy survives the fatal ordeal. How is that even possible? A doctor comes in to check on the boy. He is not there to make sure that the boy makes it out alive, but to make sure that the poor soul won't. The doctor then covers the boy's mouth and nose in an effort to finish the job. The boy suffers a cruel fate and didn't survive this time. Saul can only watch in horror from a distance. Calloused by the horror of his everyday existence, seeing someone so young getting killed haunts Saul to his very core. After that, the doctor demands an autopsy to find out what caused the boy to survive. Saul volunteers to take the boy's body and carries him towards the autopsy room. Saul begs the doctor not to open the boy's body. The doctor explains that he's a prisoner as well and is just following orders, but he promises to give Saul 5 minutes to be with the dead boy later at night before he will be burnt to a crisp. The workers are tasked to collect the jackets of the prisoners as well as gold, jewelry and money. Saul goes to each pocket hoping to find something valuable, but his look fails. Saul then secretly approaches a rabbi named Machias. A rabbi is a Jewish spiritual leader. Saul begs the rabbi to give the recently departed boy a proper burial. Machias explains to him that his hands are tied given the situation that they are in, but he can say a little prayer about the boy. Their conversation is interrupted as a Nazi officer questions Saul's presence in the area. Luckily, Elijah, an Oberkapo, steps in to vouch for Saul. An Oberkapo is a prisoner assigned as chief foreman to oversee the detainees who are given some authority over other prisoners. Later on, a detainee hands over some jewelry to the Oberkapo. He shifts his attention to Saul, who admits that he has not collected any precious loot yet. Saul approaches another detainee and lets him know that he needs another rabbi as Machias is not up to the task. The detainee recommends a Greek prisoner who used to be a rabbi. He is told that he'll find that rabbi from the Commando of Miatek. Commando is a detachment just like the concentration camp that they are currently in. Saul needs to find a way to go there. Saul overhears while Abraham and Elijah are talking. Elijah is in need of a locksmith to be sent to Miatek's camp. Saul knows that this is his only chance in meeting the Greek rabbi. He volunteers himself. After all, he was a watchmaker. On their way out, another prisoner named Katz goes with them. Katz is also a locksmith. Katz and Saul stash some jewelry in their shoes. Jewelry comes in handy when capos show up. A capo supervises the prisoners. While Saul is fixing the door at Miatek's camp, Katz reveals a camera and begins to take some photos. Sensing that their safety is in jeopardy, Saul grabs the camera and hides it in a pipe. Some German guards notice that they stop working and immediately go after them. Shaken, Saul and Katz resume their work fixing the door. Saul observes that workers are lining up to board a truck. He makes his way in and looks for a Greek rabbi. He finds him, but the rabbi ignores him. He boards the truck without knowing where it will take him, as his determination to give the young boy a proper burial outweighs the risk he puts himself into. The truck stops in the middle of nowhere and the prisoners begin to dispose of ashes of the dead prisoners. He confronts the rabbi again, who does not want to have anything to do with him. Saul grabs his shovel and throws it into the river. The rabbi goes after it, knowing that he would get shot. Not soon after, warning shots are fired. Saul immediately rescues him despite putting his life at risk. They both survive and are confronted by Miatek. Saul explains that the shovel fell into the water and he tried to recover it. Miatek believes his story but orders the Greek rabbi to stay behind. His fate is sealed. As Saul is leaving the rabbi behind, he hears a gunshot. He is certain that the only person he came to see has just been killed. A capo questions Saul as he seems to come from another camp. Saul bribes him with some jewelry he stashed in his shoe to let him go. Later, The prisoners are on their way back to Miatek's camp. Elijah grabs him to bring him back. Abraham asks him if he found the rabbi, but Saul refuses to say anything that the rabbi was shot dead just a few moments ago. Afterward, Saul discreetly goes back to the autopsy room. The main door is locked, so he goes to the other side to let himself in. The table where the boy's body was laid is now empty. As fate would have it, German officers, along with the doctor, come in and catch him by surprise. He explains that he's there to clean. An officer makes fun of him, pushes him around and smacks him in the head to humiliate him before he is allowed to leave the room. Saul searches for the dead boy's body everywhere to no avail. He sees the doctor and asks where the boy is. The doctor confides that the body is with him and that he's hiding him away from the other doctors. Saul suggests if they could have the body to that of another person, but the doctor explains that an autopsy is needed. The doctor takes Saul where he hides the boy. Saul then wraps him around a blanket and carries him on his shoulder. Saul seems to care so much for this young boy as he moved mountains in an effort to get him a proper burial. Subsequently, Abraham reminds Saul that they will get the weapon tonight and that they should be ready for the morning. Abraham is referring to gunpowder that they will get from the girls' camp. Saul remains determined in his search for a rabbi. Abraham promises that he'd help him find a rabbi after their plan is materialized. The senior squad leader, whom they call a Berscharführer, arrives and orders that the day shift reinforcements are put to work. He wants to trim down their number. As he leaves the area, he points at Saul and commands him to follow him. Saul is taken aback, but he knows there's not much of a choice at this point. Much to his surprise, Saul was simply ordered to clean up the table. Later, Saul overhears the Berscharführer giving orders on prisoner execution. He then asks Elijah to provide him a list of 70 names that he does not need anymore. Elijah tells Abraham that they are next in line to be executed. They must take action now. Abraham suggests that they meet Ella now and that Saul should go with them as he knows Ella. Saul denies that he knows her. They then try to abandon the area, but the Berscharführer sees them. He asks Elijah why they are leaving when there's a lot of work to do. Elijah explains that they need to get rid of some clothes as the pileup is hindering their movement. They are headed towards the women's camp where Ella is. Elijah is ordered to stay while the rest of his men, including Saul and Abraham, go on. Upon reaching the camp, Abraham hands a piece of jewelry to the guard. They then go to meet the lady in charge, who calls for Ella. The lady then gives him a pouch of gunpowder. She seems to know him, but he refuses to interact with her. As Saul is going back, he finds himself in the middle of newly arrived prisoners. He takes advantage of this situation as he tries to look for a rabbi. An old woman hears him and points out at someone who is a rabbi. Finally, a rabbi. To save the life of the rabbi and be able to perform the burial ceremony, Saul recommends that the rabbi become a Sonderkommando. This plan backfires as an officer shoots the rabbi in the head. Another rabbi approaches Saul. This time Saul gives his clothes and takes him in. There are other Sonderkommandos who are not convinced that he is a real rabbi, but Saul is certain that he is. While Saul is cleaning up the boy's body, Abraham asks him for the gunpowder that Ella gave. That's their ticket to freedom. When Saul checks his pocket, it's gone. It fell during the turmoil earlier. The clumsy mistake makes the rest of the Sonderkommando frustrated and restless. The explosive powder is a crucial part of the plan for tomorrow. Abraham confronts him and asks him why the need for a rabbi and a proper burial when he can just bury him and move on. Saul then reveals that the young boy was his son. As pandemonium breaks loose, Saul carries the body of his son and sneaks towards a forested area with the rabbi. Saul finds a place to bury his son and digs a grave fast. He begs for the rabbi to say the Kaddish, a hymn that is normally recited during a funeral in Jewish tradition. The rabbi is unable to perform the ritual. Saul is beginning to think that he is not a real rabbi. He was warned before, but the desperate Saul refused to listen. Some prisoners are headed their way, escaping the chaos. Sensing that the Germans are trailing them, Saul has no other choice than to carry the body again and cross the river. Saul has to let go of the body when he can no longer manage to carry it while trying to stay afloat. When he is about to drown, the doctor comes from behind and rescues him. The movie ends with the doctor, Saul, and other